Caleb Jones, A Teaching and Learning Case Study by Mackenzie Messick, Eileen Stott, Christy McAllister, and Xingying Kang. Background: Caleb Jones is a 16-year-old sophomore attending Pittsburgh High in Pittsburgh, California. His first period English language arts teacher, Mrs. Stevens, has noticed some particular behavior characteristics that have caused her to be a little alarmed. She has noticed that Caleb has had very spotty attendance, and when he does attend her class, he is often without breakfast and quite tired. Although when he attends class, he understands the material and performs well, it is obvious that his absences are affecting his academic success. His mind seems to be elsewhere, often during lectures, and often leaves class early. Socially, he keeps to himself, and the other students do not really befriend him. They often say that he is weird, quiet, and wears the same old clothes all the time. When discussing things in class about world views and perspectives, he seems to just see the world in terms of local settings. When Caleb speaks, he uses very casual, street language that is different from the language people usually use in a school setting. Mrs. Stevens can tell that he is bright but does not find the time to complete homework and assignments. Goals. For this unit, Mrs. Stevens' goal is for her students to analyze how characters in a book change, interact, and move the plot along. The goal is for her students is based off of the California Common Core standards. Analyze how complex characters, those with multiple or conflicting motivations, develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance the plot or develop the theme. This objective is important for the students because it will help them understand how characters are developed and why characters are crucial to the storyline. Scenario. This unit will be covered over the course of 3 days in which the students will be required to complete various assignments and activities. The class will be focusing on the characters throughout the book Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This book deals with characters that are of similar age to the students reading it, which will allow them to relate to the story well. The main purpose and goal of the first lesson is to compare and contrast two characters in the story. Mrs. Stevens had assigned her students to read the first 3 chapters of the book so they could discuss the characters they read about so far. Mrs. Stevens began asking questions about characters Ralph, Jack, and Simon. She had the students write down a list of characteristics describing each character and their personalities along with the drawing of each character for the homework the night before so that they could come prepared to see Appendix A. Miss Stevens collected the homework and noticed that Caleb's was not all the way finished. After giving the students a fair amount of time to give their thoughts down from what they read before, Miss Stevens began a discussion about comparing and contrasting each of the characters. When she calls on Caleb to answer, he often gives sarcastic, joking remarks. He also uses very survival-based language. It seems to Mrs. Stevens that Caleb has read some of the assigned reading, but definitely not all of it. After the lesson had finished and first period was over, Mrs. Stevens asked Caleb to wait for a second as he was rushing out of the door. When getting a closer look, she could see dark circles under his eyes and a shirt that looked slept in. She asked him if he had actually read the assignment, and he simply responded with, "I gotta go, I'm late." Mrs. Stevens is beginning to have a bigger concern rather than just having a student not doing his homework. In the second lesson, the objective is for the students to be making connections between the characters and settings they are in. Mrs. Stevens lists some characters on the board: Ralph, Simon, Jack, and Piggy. She then has the class separate into small groups to 3 or 4 and has them pick on a character off the board and discuss their character based on the setting. As she walks around, she is observing the students and their groups. When she comes to Caleb's group, she sees they are in a group of 4 and they pick Simon as their key character. She notices that the other members are informing Caleb and another boy in the group where they were in the book and who Simon as a character was because they did not do his homework. Mrs. Stevens does one more lap around helping other students stay on track, and then when she comes back around she notices they are still behind and discussing the readings. Mrs. Stevens pauses and asks why the 2 boys haven't done their homework or readings. One responds by saying he just doesn't like the book and forgot, while Caleb says, "I didn't have time to get to it last night. Things came up with the family." See Appendix B. Mrs. Stevens takes note of how sincere Caleb was with his response. When the groups were done, one person was to stand up and explain the connections between the characters and the settings. Caleb volunteers for the group and drew very good connections of how Simon loves nature and explained it thoroughly. Mrs. Stevens is wondering what is keeping him from doing his homework because he succeeds in class more than he does in his homework. The final part of the lesson with Lord of the Flies uses group work. Mrs. Stevens asks each group to pick 2 events in the story and compare and contrast the characters, their settings, and how they helped advance the plot. As Mrs. Stevens walks around the room to keep her students on task, she notices that Caleb is asleep on his desk. She nudges him and asks him to join a group and begin working. Caleb joins the group next to him, and everyone begins working on the assignment. Towards the second half of class, Mrs. Stevens wraps up the group work and asks her students to present what they discussed to the class. Each group came up to the front of the class and talked about their 2 events, which each member contributing an idea about how they are similar or different. When Caleb's group came up to the front, Mrs. Stevens could just tell by the body language that Caleb was off to the side and not really a part of the group. Each student spoke, and then Caleb went last. His remarks seemed like he still had not read the material but was simply restating what his other group members had previously said, and again made various jokes about it. Throughout the whole second part of the lesson, Caleb would look at the clock. At 9:10 he gathered his things and left the class 15 minutes before class got out. See Appendix C. Miss Stevens definitely thinks there is something going on with Caleb Jones, and she wants to know what she can do to help him become more successful in her class.